All right. That's a good reason. That's a good reason. Well, I've known Stan for a long time, over 20 years now. And it's kind of an interesting relationship how we met and all that stuff. And it's through a product that we've represented for a long time. But Stan is a family doctor, has been for well over 35 years in Pennsylvania. That's why he's not here. And he's always been an interesting guy for me to talk to, because I could introduce him to scientists or doctors and they'd have these conversations and they were always over my head, but he was really good at helping me understand. And I guess going on a couple of years ago now, we started talking regularly. And I didn't realize, I guess, how much I'd missed for 20 years in terms of how much he knows to benefit people. And this isn't like hype and testimony or theory. This is a guy that's working in a community with people of all ages, infants to seniors. And he's got a moniker. It's the whole health doc. Okay, he believes in all aspects of healing and of health, including the physical, emotional, the mental, spiritual aspects of it. And some of the results are incredible. And so we started talking about, in particular, you're going to hear in a minute, some issues around what's going on with gut health today. I've heard these talks starting about 3 or 4 years ago. I sit and I listen and I'm like, so? Well, some things happened with my wife. I'll talk about that later. And so I started listening to what he was saying. And it helped. It helped my wife. And then I just did it with her and I had some benefit from it. I'll share those stories in a little bit, but I'm going to kind of lay a subtle groundwork with this. I mean, everybody here, we all like to be happy, right? And you got to feel good to be happy. You got to have some health, some energy. I mean, there's some things we'd like to have in order to be happy, but I mean, you take away the feeling good, you're screwed. And how many of you know that our world isn't perfect today? For instance, okay, you guys are familiar with that? So is our air extremely pure?
Not today.
No, it's not. So we're not breathing perfectly clean air. How about the water we're drinking? Sorry guys, but that bottled water isn't, it's not great. I mean, but neither is the tap water. So where are you going to go? How many of you know that modern farming techniques, and this is no judgment on any person or anybody or anything like that, but how many of you know that farmers use fertilizers and herbicides and pesticides, and our fields have been not well cared for? Well, we all know that, and they're doing this for really good reasons. I mean, we have these industries out there that are doing this, and they say we can increase yield. That's a good thing, right? Sounds good. We can make more food. We can hold costs down. We can ease the burden of the farmer. All these things that are great. But there's a consequence to that until less than a year ago, I didn't understand. Actually, it was August last year when I ordered my keeper making stuff. But it matters. So what's cool is we have an opportunity here to share some information that matters in a way that people can grab it, you can run with it. You can do whatever you want to with it. We're not going to twist anybody's arm or talk in anything. We're just saying if we live in this environment and if we're all going like this, we accept it's our current reality. What are some things we can do to improve our health in an existing reality that we don't have complete control over? That's some of what we're going to talk about. And Doc, I guess I'm going to let you kind of introduce yourself today if there's anything else you want to say, but you ready to roll?
Okay.
All right. And by the way, any questions, you can holler up and down, jump up around, we'll break. But this is interactive, so you guys can ask me whatever the heck you want. So thanks.
Yeah, if you have a question that's off topic, that's fine too. If I know the answer, I'll make a stab at trying to answer it. As Jim has mentioned, I've been a family practice doctor for more than 35 years. Actually, I've been in medicine officially more than 40 years this year. Graduated from medical school, started residency. And my goal during that time has been to learn how to practice holistic or whole person health medicine. And it's been a gradual process, and I still feel like I'm learning a lot more every year. That's the discovery of how we can use a whole person health approach to our health problems is part of what energizes me for the day, because I don't think that the medical model is the best model for long-term wellness. It's a great model for acute care, serious accidents, injuries, illnesses, but in terms of wellness and disease prevention, it's not the best model. And the model that we'll be talking about tonight is, I think, touches on some of the things that I think work a little bit better. And one of the things that Jim didn't mention, which I consider to be really the foundational health issue for people today, is dealing with chronic stress. So my passion has actually been how to help people deal with and overcome chronic stress. Ever since I've been in medical school, it's been something I've been interested in understanding. Now, one of the things that's happened since I was in medical school up to the current day is this very gradual change in our society from what I would say intermittent high levels of stress with frequent breaks, which we used to call them weekends, and to what we now have is continuous stress for most people. They don't leave stress behind. They're in this state of chronic stress, and that produces some significant bad things in the body. Some chemical changes happen that are not good for the body, and there are different things that affect chronic stress, and chronic stress then affects the body in adverse ways. So tonight we're going to be focusing on gut health primarily, but gut health plays a huge role in the regulation of chronic stress and also in the cause of chronic stress in our society. So even if you have, like, if you leave tonight with some of the concepts that we talk about more integrated into your life, you will be in a better position to deal with the other causes of chronic stress in your life. And so what we want to try to do is to eliminate the GI tract as being a big source of chronic stress. And it is for most people, and they don't understand that it is. And it's producing a state that sort of sets us up for disease and certainly robs us of high energy and the ability to function at our very best. So to kind of get my mind around how to present this to my patients, like, I've kind of divided the GI health, the gastrointestinal health, into 4 different areas, which I liken to legs on a stool or cornerstones of a house. And so we're going to talk about each one of these legs very briefly and try to kind of show how they're linked together, and then try to answer any questions that you might have. So the first thing that I want to focus on is that the gut is normally in a very, very rapid and tight communication with the brain. And it is the main signaler in the body for what we would call the rest and digest system. So you've all heard of fight or flight as the sort of the stress response that many people have, and many people have all day long. And for a lot of us, we have it continuously. We wake up with it. We even wake up in the middle of the night with it. Well, there's supposed to be a balancing system in the body that the official term of it is called the parasympathetic nervous system. And the parasympathetic nervous system governs all of the organs. So the brain talks to all of the organs through this system, but those organs also talk back to the brain, especially the GI tract. And if the GI tract communication signal back to the brain is impaired, you automatically are pushed into chronic stress. You might have the most peaceful life. You might be sitting around eating bonbons all day and having every need met. But if your GI tract is out of whack and it's not communicating back to the brain adequately, then you will be pushed into the chronic stress response, even if you feel peaceful. The chemical changes in your body will be the chronic stress response, and then that turns around and signals back to the body all sorts of situations that predispose to disease. So that's why it's really critical to make sure that we kind of look at the gut and say, well, how can we optimize the gut talking to the brain in a way that makes it balanced with this fight or flight mechanism. So this rest and digest system is fully turned on and the brain is hearing it. So the GI tract is going to try to digest food that we send its way, whether or not it's communicating well with the brain. But we want it to communicate well with the brain. We want that signal, that communication upstream to the brain, to be unimpaired. And what we're doing with our lifestyles significantly impairs that. So the things that contribute most dramatically to this system are actually the bacteria, the fungi, and the viruses that live in our GI tract. And we call that the microbiome. So the microbiome of the GI tract is supposed to be a certain way. There's supposed to be certain species of all these different things, of the trillions of microorganisms. It's supposed to be a certain way. And then those species are supposed to be able to talk to each other instantaneously. That's the way the system is supposed to work. But once you start introducing certain chemicals into that environment, it damages many of the species, wipes some of them out, and it very much damages the communication network between the species, so they can't then communicate in a cohesive whole to the brain through the vagus nerve. So one of the chemicals that does this disruption is called glyphosate. It's widely used in backyards as a weed killer. It's used by farmers to kill weeds. It's sprayed on many, many crops. It's sprayed on GMO crops. It's sprayed on which stands for genetically modified organism crops. But it's also sprayed on crops that aren't GMO, such as wheat. It's now being sprayed on a lot of hay before it's being harvested. And the glyphosate has several undesirable effects. First of all, it's an antibiotic. It was first marketed as an antibiotic in the 1970s before it became marketed as a weed killer. And so it's very effective at killing off some species. The second thing that it does, and this is really critical, is that it impairs the communication between the microorganisms in the gut. So they don't communicate in the proper way back to the brain. The third thing that it does is that it damages the connection between the cells in the bowel, and those connections between those cells are called tight junctions, and the tight junctions are damaged badly with glyphosate. So what happens when that happens is that the cells don't stick together right, and they open up and allow things to get through that aren't supposed to get through. And that means some undigested food that's not fully digested, chemicals that would otherwise be held back by the gut can start to get through. So the glyphosate damages the ability for the gut to hold itself together right and to absorb the right nutrients in the right sequence. But it also then allows other things to get through that aren't supposed to get through. And those things are free to go throughout the body, including to the brain. So the glyphosate is having all these different effects on the body, and others that I won't get into. So that's what's going on for virtually everybody at some level. Now, some people are exquisitely sensitive to this, and they're sick all the time because of this process. Some people have a more robust composition, and they're able to withstand it. They don't really feel much going on, but they're not operating at their peak either. And then the effect of the other chemicals getting through just sort of aggravates that. So, but this is going on all the time. So when I teach people how to be well once they don't have wellness anymore, the first step is to try to limit these chemicals, particularly glyphosate, because that's the most damaging of all of the chemicals that we're putting into our gut in terms of the common things that are in there. So glyphosate is an herbicide. It's not a pesticide. It doesn't kill bugs. It kills weeds, but it kills plants basically. But the other chemicals that are also damaging to the GI tract and to other parts of the body, they're sort of given an amplified effect now because the gut has become leaky for these things getting through. And so the first step is trying to minimize chemical exposure. So that means a few things, practically speaking. First of all, it means that if somebody's serious about this, they're going to start eating organically, because the glyphosate is pretty much ubiquitously spread throughout the environment. 70 to 80% of the groundwater is contaminated with glyphosate. So it's going to be decades before it's out of our systems, assuming we stopped using it tomorrow, which we're not going to stop using it tomorrow. So choosing foods that are the lowest possible with glyphosate are the first food choices to make. So what are those foods? First of all, organic foods, because those are foods that are purposely, no chemicals are put on them. Even organic foods, though, have some of this stuff on them because, as I said, the water's polluted with it. The second thing to do, going beyond organic and trying to hone in on what are the major food groups that are carrying most of the glyphosate. So if you're going to say, okay, I can't eat organic all the time, what are the main foods that I need to avoid? The main foods are grains, because that's what the glyphosate is sprayed on the most. And so when it's sprayed on the grains incorporate it into the plant incorporates it into the grain, and then you eat it. So those include the GMO foods, which include almost all the corn, almost all the soy, and about half of the wheat, which is not GMO, is also sprayed with glyphosate. And the problem is that the wheat that is sprayed isn't separated out from the wheat that isn't sprayed. So that isn't tracked by anybody. So most of the wheat-based foods that you're exposed to have glyphosate in them at some level. Now, it is possible to get organic flour in the store now. There's going to be probably increasing options for that as what I'm telling you becomes more widely known. But right now, most of the things that you consume that are the common grain foods actually are quite contaminated with this glyphosate. And I was reading an article to Jim yesterday that was in one of the major news organizations that was describing that, research has shown that it's showing up in children's cereals. Well, it should be no surprise because it's in all of these grains. So it's going to be in the breads, the pastas, crackers, cereal, pretzels, and then all of the corn-based foods. So that's a lot of stuff to have to not eat. So what do you eat? Well, we'll get around to that as I get into the other legs of the stool. But first of all, the first step is eating clean, eating as clean as possible, and drinking water as clean as possible, breathing air as clean as possible. Now, the second leg of the...
Doc, let's see if anybody has any questions on that so far, just real quick. You guys have any questions on that?
How do you spell glyphosate?
Glyphosate.
See, I'm super glad I asked. G-L?
G-L-Y-P-H-O...
S-A-T-E.
S-A-T-E. And so I just want to back up to the reality piece a little bit. So what are most of our consumable animals eating? Grains? So are they picking up glyphosate from the grains that they're eating?
Right. That's one of the reasons why organic, when we talk about eating organic, it includes animal products. So feedlots, for instance, they are the food that the animals are being fed in feedlots generally are GMO corn, and so they're getting plenty of glyphosate in their meat. So if you eat a non-organic or not, normally it's range, the distinction for animal products are range fed or grass fed. But if you eat non-range fed animal products, then you're getting glyphosate because those animals were fed glyphosate foods. And so you want to, if you're intent on making these kind of changes for the benefit of your health, you want to be aiming at foods, the animal products, that they weren't given the opportunity to eat foods that have glyphosate in them, because they will transfer that glyphosate to you as that product is harvested from the animal. And that includes milk that comes from the cows that are being milked, in addition to the meat or any other products that come from milk. So that's why you have to have kind of a comprehensive approach if your goal is to minimize exposure to these.
Okay. Any other questions on the glyphosates? Okay, Doc, step 2.
Step 2 is rehabilitation of the gut. And so one of the things that I discovered over the years was that if I gave probiotic foods to my patients who were going to take an antibiotic for whatever reason, that they did a lot better than if I gave them probiotic capsules. And in some cases, particularly in this part of the country, we have a lot of Lyme disease, and many of these patients are on antibiotics for weeks or months, and in some cases years. And as obviously, if they're taking an antibiotic, it's affecting the gut bacteria. And the main thing that stops them from continuing the antibiotics is they get too sick from damaging their gut. So what I've discovered over the years was that probiotic foods worked better in allowing people to continue antibiotic therapy for Lyme disease. So I've kind of used that as a strategy for everybody that has an interest in general wellness, because we can assume that our gut is under attack from the chemicals that I just described. So the best way, in my experience, to rehabilitate the gut, to repopulate the gut, is by using foods that are fermented as opposed to probiotic bacteria in a capsule. And the reason is the diversity of bacteria is so much more. There's dozens of species and subspecies in a fermented food compared to what's present in most probiotic capsules. So I have three main foods that I recommend for people, at least 2 for almost everybody, and then a third one for those that are willing to go the extra mile. But the first one is organic apple cider vinegar. And the reason I recommend this one is that it actually has bacteria growing in it that eat glyphosate. It has a few different species, but one of the species, the main one in this organic vinegar, it actually eats glyphosate. So if you're trying to restrict your glyphosate exposure, then you're going to further decrease the amount of glyphosate that is being available to injure your gut if you're using the organic vinegar multiple times a day. And it can be sort of mixed or diluted in a way where it's palatable. I definitely don't recommend taking it full strength, but I do recommend taking it at least 3 times a day, and 4 times is optimal. The second thing and I think Jim is going to be giving you some more information on that, is fermented milk, which is kefir. This is an ancient drink, but it's kind of fallen off the map in the United States for the last 50 plus years, but it's starting to be available in stores again. And so fermented milk has a whole bunch of different bacteria that also have the distinction of eating pesticides. So the organophosphate pesticides are eaten by one of the species that lives in kefir. Now, kefir is about 10 times more probiotic dense than yogurt. So if you're going to choose between yogurt and kefir, I would choose the kefir. They taste similar, but they would also be complementary because the species in the yogurt are different than the ones that are in kefir, even though they do taste similar. So by consuming these things on a regular basis, on a daily basis, you can help to rehabilitate your gut if you're avoiding the toxins. If you're not avoiding the toxins, it's really hard for your gut to recover to the place it's supposed to be. And there are some fermentation tricks if you do stuff at home where you can further increase your exposure to different probiotic bacteria that we could talk about later. The third leg of the chair is nutritional supplementation. And this is something that I have recommended for patients for almost 25 years. After studying the role of our relatively toxic environment causing a lot of free radical damage to our bodies. So free radical damage is the simplest way to imagine what that looks like, are sparks flying out of a fireplace, landing on a carpet, burning the carpet, and antioxidants being the screen that capture the sparks. And because of the aforementioned chemicals and a whole lot of other chemicals, we have a lot more free radical damage going on than ever before. And it's accelerating, it's not decreasing. The environment may seem cleaner, but these chemicals are insidious and cause a lot of free radical damage. And what they're damaging now, much more than before, are the powerhouses in our cells that are called the mitochondria. So adequate nutritional supplementation helps to replace or helps to give the body the antioxidants that it needs, but it also helps to signal these mitochondria to repair themselves if they have the nutrients there to help them repair themselves, and the right nutritional supplement can do that. In my experience, people that do choose the broad spectrum nutritional supplement approach diverge from those that don't. Over the years, I've seen people take one approach or the other, and I see a distinct difference 20 years down the road. And I think the road will become even farther apart as that time lengthens. I have some patients that approach 25 years now on particular broad spectrum supplements that I've seen that they do better than people that did not make that choice. And then the fourth thing that I recommend to decrease the inflammation in the body is to eat in what we would call a low inflammatory way. So there are two things that I really focus on in this regard. The first is called low glycemic eating. So low glycemic refers to eating in a way that the blood sugar doesn't rise quickly, but it rises slowly after a meal. So this whole glycemic index stuff was researched in the 80s and 90s. And so every food way back then was mapped out as far as the carbohydrates, as how fast do they raise the blood sugar. So we know what foods raise the blood sugar quickly and which ones raise them slowly. And when you raise the blood sugar quickly over and over again, that produces a problem in the body that's called insulin resistance. And so when you are eating foods on a regular basis over and over again, the blood sugar rises rapidly, and then the body pumps out a bunch of insulin to keep the blood sugar from going up too fast or too far, and it turns it around, makes it come back down. But if you do that over and over again, which is the typical American diet, because of the grains that we consume, if you do that over and over again, the body becomes resistant to its own insulin signal, and the insulin levels become much higher than ever intended. And when they reach these higher levels, they're very pro-inflammatory. In other words, they cause inflammation in the body, particularly your delicate blood vessels and brain tissue. So by decreasing the glycemic index of the foods, by choosing foods that don't raise the blood sugar quickly, that decreases inflammation dramatically. And if somebody hasn't been eating like this, but they decide to start eating like this, they will decrease the inflammation in their body dramatically because their insulin levels will start to drop back down towards normal. And they'll feel a whole lot better very, very quickly. Within a month, they'll usually feel quite a bit better. So glycemic index refers to carbohydrates. It doesn't refer to proteins and fats, which are digested in a different way. So the glycemic index refers to carbs, which are basically the grains, fruits, and vegetables. And so the foods that are high glycemic are basically the foods that most Americans are eating for 2 or 3 meals a day, which are grains, potatoes, rice, and sugar. And if you are in a state of insulin resistance already, if you're already stuck there, there's only one way back, and that's to back out away from those foods. Now, these foods aren't evil foods, but because of how we overconsume them in our society, they cause a response that once you're in this state of insulin resistance, there's only one way out, and that's backing out from consuming those foods for several months, usually 9 to 12 months for the body to fix itself. And then after that, consuming them in moderation, much more moderation. The second thing that I think is really important in terms of decreasing inflammation in how we eat is avoiding bad fats. So there are a couple of bad fats that I like to focus on because they're the big players for most people. They aren't the ones that you've been taught. So the fats that are in eggs are not bad for you. The fat that's in range-fed beef is not bad for you. But what is bad for you are all the vegetable oils, because those are damaged omega-6 fats, and all of the trans fats, which are the fats where they've been artificially changed to make the shelf life longer for the food. So anything that's kind of packaged and sits there for a long time on the shelf and looks like it's fresh, often those have trans fats in them. And even though technically they're supposed to be labeled, if they have less than a certain amount, the food industry is able to say that it's 0 trans fats when in fact there are trans fats in them. So basically, by staying away from processed foods, you can minimize your exposure to trans fats. And by staying away from vegetable oils, you can stay away from those very pro-inflammatory fats. So when combined with this low glycemic eating strategy, which I call the modified plate, then that helps a person to secure that fourth leg of the chair. You're eating in a way that does not provoke inflammation. It reverses insulin resistance, which allows people to rapidly lose weight without doing anything different, just eating the same number of calories, just eating different calories. And when combined with these other strategies, in my experience, this is sufficient for most people to recover their health. And in many cases, if they don't recover their health, they still recover a lot of their health, so they feel a lot better. And so the principles that I just outlined to you, I basically recommend to any patient who has a chronic medical condition and wants to do the things that were within their power to feel better. So I heartily recommend these strategies to you because I've seen them work in almost every kind of medical situation that you can think of. The principles are sound no matter what the medical condition is, because we're basically dealing with how do we make our gut healthy. And this is, I'm not saying it's the only way to do it, but this is one simple way to do it, and it works pretty much all the time if you do it. So that is basically what I wanted to share with you, and just to remind you that this is a kind of a subset of how do you decrease the chronic stress in your life and have a healthier life in the long run. Well, the gut is a huge player in terms of how the body creates the stress response. And so by fixing your GI tract, having it as healthy as possible, by doing these kind of strategies, you can decrease stress dramatically. And the other strategies that do work very well to decrease stress work a lot better when you're taking care of your gut. So that's all I had to share. I'll be happy to entertain any questions if you have any.
You guys got anything? I'll ask him some, but go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Barely.
Here you go, Barb. Holler in that.
Okay, I can holler. I have a friend recently I ran into, I visited, who said they're starting to make kefir water. And the way they were doing it was just sugar and water and putting the kefir grains in. And then for flavoring, mostly for their kids, I guess, they were adding what they called the most natural, nothing added juice. And I think they said Welch's. I thought that might make you smile. So how does, I'm not sure why they're doing water instead of milk. I never got to ask them that, but why, I mean, tell me what you think of the difference of the water versus the milk and why, and even using it with non-dairy milk.
Well, in my experience, so kefiring actually refers to fermenting. So kefired milk is fermented milk. So you can kefir almond milk, you can kefir coconut milk. I wouldn't advise it. It doesn't taste very good, but you can do it if you want to. You can ferment just about anything. As long as you can keep the right species growing and dominant in that culture. So you know what sour milk tastes like. That's a different fermentation process. A different species got control of that milk. With kefir milk, we're introducing some specific species to be dominant and to grow, and then we're going to obviously consume it. But there's a couple things that happens with kefir milk that I find very powerful. First of all, it completely digests all of the lactose. So it's basically a sugar-free drink. It's not a carb-free drink, but there's not very many carbs left after you've digested the lactose. Now, this is true if you do what we call a double kefirring process, which Jim will explain later in his kefir demonstration if he's still going to do that. But it's like a 2-day process of doing the kefir. The second thing is that a lot of people think they have a milk sensitivity that is related to casein, which is one of the major proteins and protein groups in milk. And when you double kefir, that means kefir 2 days in a row, you pretty much digest 100% of the casein. Because I know people that are exquisitely sensitive to the proteins in milk. They have to take digestive enzymes to consume even tiny amounts of milk, and they can drink drink double kefir milk without any difficulties. So why would you want to drink milk instead of this sugar water? Well, because the fats in milk are fantastic for people. Research on, for instance, on children exposed to whole milk as opposed to skim milk, they have less asthma. So when you start tampering with the normal food sources, I think you get unintended consequences. So why would I want to just introduce a bunch of bacteria to water with sugar when I could do this to milk? It's like taking a giant step backward to me. But could you do it? Yeah, you could do it. But I don't know why you'd want to do it.
Well, and what I read, I tried to look online a little bit and see, and what they were showing online was that the number of bacteria and yeast in kefir milk was like 3 times at least of what it is in kefir water.
You mean kefir water had more than kefir milk?
No, kefir milk had like at least 3 times or more
Milk is better.
more varieties of bacteria and yeast than the water did.
Well, I would expect that, yes, because you're providing a much more diverse variety of things to feed on, and so. But even if it was identical, I still would be suspicious of whether all of the sugar got digested in the kefirring process of using this water. And when I was talking about low glycemic eating, I kind of glossed over several things that are part of the strategy that I teach people. But one of the things I teach people is to avoid fruit juices, because it's basically concentrated fructose. And concentrated fructose, you might have heard of high fructose corn syrup. Well, concentrated fructose is concentrated fructose as far as your body's concerned. And if you hit your body with high concentrations of fructose and you are in insulin resistance, you're pushing the button on your liver to say, store the fat. So once your body is in insulin resistance, then fructose is a very strong signal to the body to store the fat. So how many kids are overweight? A lot of them are. So the last thing they need to be drinking is concentrated fructose, which is fruit juice. So they could drink a fruit smoothie that has some vegetables in it, maybe some milk added, but they shouldn't be drinking any fruit juice anyway.
When you add juice, even if it's good natural juice, to water kefir to flavor it, I mean, that means you're drinking that right away as the flavoring, so therefore it's not eating up the sugar, right?
Correct. Well, I would assume so. I mean,
Yeah,
if you're drinking it right away. But
that's what I think. Okay.
yeah, there's a lot of creative things. Once a healthy thing becomes popular, it's inevitable that the food industry is going to mess with it. I mean, they're going to do it, and they always do. And then they end up with these junky foods that are prepackaged. They're not fresh anymore. And I can see that coming down the pike, what you just described. That sounds diabolical, but I can see that. So I can see that's one application of the principle. But Why do it when you can kefir the milk and drink it? It's like you can't improve on that. You can't improve on that food. A whole milk that's kefired, it's very difficult to improve on that as a food source.
Got it. Thanks.
Other questions?
So if we get lactose-free milk, because my husband is lactose intolerant. So if we get lactose-free milk and my husband's lactose intolerant,
Yes.
how can I, would the kefir change that?
If you kefired lactose-free milk, you mean?
No, if I got regular milk and just put the kefir in it, would he be able to drink it?
I think so. If you did the 2-day process, the double kefiring, probably it'll digest all the lactose.
That's awesome.
But it also, more importantly, it digests the casein, which casein is really the issue for most people, because there are two types of casein, and so there's two types of milk. They have a casein 1 and casein 2. One of them is very pro-inflammatory for a lot of people, and so the food industry is starting to figure this out, and they're starting to make products that have the non-inflammatory casein, but the kefiring process digests the casein also. So in other words, the protein, this large complicated protein, is broken down into the amino acids. So it's like drinking an amino acid drink.
That's awesome.
Yeah, it is.
It breaks it down so you don't have to use your own enzymes to.
Correct. I mean, which people have problems because they don't have the enzymes to do it. That's why they use digestive enzymes. The reason I know this, the story I told you, is it's a very close friend, family member that has this phenomenon that can't drink the smallest amount of milk without a bunch of digestive enzymes, or paying the price, but she can drink kefir, double kefir, homemade double kefired kefir.
Thank you. Great.
You're welcome.
Other questions? I got it. Well, I got a doctor. See, I listened, like I said, I listened to other doctors before he started explaining this to me. And then he obviously has got great passion. Why do I think it's worth me doing this and asking people to invite? Why? Why? And so I want to ask some crazy questions of the doc, just to kind of put this into context.
Jim, do you have your mic off?
No, can you hear me?
Better now, yeah.
Okay, sorry. I'm going to ask some questions of you guys with him here, and just kind of see where this goes. But this idea of gut health, okay? He talks specifically about certain things, but Doc, if our gut biome isn't healthy, does that I'm just gonna say, does that affect our energy levels?
Yes.
Okay. And you've already said that it impacts our ability to deal with stress, and that's all kinds of stress, including physical stress, emotional stress, all kinds of stress.
Yes, because it adds to the stress response. It's signaling your gut. When your gut is disturbed enough, it's signaling the body to be in stress. It's telling the brain be in stress, because that signal back from the gut isn't the signal that's supposed to be coming. So the brain isn't hearing what it's supposed to, the brain isn't hearing what it's listening for, which is this cohesive signal. So
we're already stressed before we're stressed.
Yes.
So, yeah. No, seriously, just keep going here. Okay. How many of you guys know what degenerative diseases are? Okay. Can you name some? Stroke. Okay. What's another one? Diabetes. What else? Arthritis, MS, heart diseases, cancers. Okay. Alzheimer's. Okay. So does a weak gut biome, is that in any way a contributor to some of the known degenerative diseases?
Yes, it's the main contributor, I think.
Oh, now how many of us think that the degenerative disease issue in our country is getting better or getting worse? Oh, it's unanimous. They think it's getting worse, Doc.
Yeah.
What are you doctors doing?
They probably know people that have autoimmune disease.
Autoimmune is huge.
Autoimmune disease is becoming epidemic, much more common than when I was in medical school and residency. And it's because of the gut issue that we just went over. It's because of this issue that that it's exploding, and it's going to continue to explode.
I just feel I have to drive this home. This impacts each and every one of us and everyone we know. Hey, Doc, does it impact the way our bodies are able to regulate our weight? Like people struggle for weight, for whatever reason, weight is a horrible problem in our country right now. Okay, so does this play a role in it in any way, shape, or form?
Yes, because this dysfunction increases the. We talked about insulin resistance as if it's all driven by food, which it is in large part. But there's also research that shows that when the brain is in stress, it signals the body to go into insulin resistance. So it actually increases insulin resistance when the brain is in stress, which it is when the gut is in stress.
So it's definitely a contributor. And that's also epidemic on the rise. And so when you look at what's going, like if you look at the media, go Google any of these problems, right? Google any of them. You're going to find silver bullets. Take this, do this, buy this, P90X it until you're better. Okay, that's what they're going to do. You're going to find an answer, and you know what these answers are? The answers are in the little miracles in your body, the trillions of cells. The answers are in there. They're intelligent little critters. If they're fed what they need and they can do what they can do, our body has an infinite capacity to heal. We are miracles walking around. Life is a gift. Our body and these little cells are miracles. And what he's talking about, okay, one of the things these miracles need is this bacteria running around in there. Who knew? Who knew that without the bacteria in your gut, you're sick? All right? And we're going to talk about this in a bit, but I like to look at this now as it's reality. Instead of fighting it, it's reality. Okay, where are you going to go? Rainwater has glyphosate in it. So those of you that have your own organic garden, great, but you're watering with glyphosate-tainted water, rainwater. We can't run. We can't hide. We've what does Dr. Wentz say? We've
soiled our nest.
We've soiled our own nest. Mother Earth is hurting. I read an article that said that if they stopped using glyphosates, it would take 20 to 25 years for the Earth to heal itself. So we're going to be doing this for a little bit, right? Now, the good news is there are some things we can do if we choose to, and it doesn't need to be overwhelming. I mean, these 4 steps, if we just hit you with wham. It's a process. It's like we talked about this. It's like going from a white belt to a yellow belt in martial arts. Okay, you don't go from where you are to black belt, right? You're not a ninja tomorrow. But what we're suggesting is you can open a door and you can step through it, and then another door and another door. And Doc, we talked about some of the simpler doors, and this is my belief, and we have to do all these things if you're trying to encompass it all. But I think the easiest first door to step into is supplementation, because it doesn't require a habit change. And it means you're going to take the supplement morning and evening. So 2 questions, Doc. One is there a difference between the supplements out there? Why are we talking about the supplements that we use? And what are some of the differences? And then you told me a story the other day about how you talk to people and determine which one of these you start with. And often it is supplementation. Often it might be a dietary change, but you have to pick your door and make your change. So could you kind of talk to that a little, Doc?
Yeah, well, I think that it depends a little bit on what they're already doing, first of all. But as far as the question of nutritional supplementation, Jim is referring to my search that I started in the early 1990s for nutritional supplementation that I could recommend to my patients that addressed the apparent need for antioxidant supplementation. And so I started looking at different companies that made antioxidants. And I spent about 3 years doing that while I continued to read the research on it. And what I was looking for was basically something that had really high quality, because the industry standard is not very high quality, was not very high quality back then. And it's way, way worse now, because most of the raw ingredients are coming from places like China for most of the nutritional supplements. And as an aside, for instance, vitamin K2 is a critically important nutrient. Most of the vitamin K2 that is being put into nutritional supplements comes from China. It's being put into bottles that say made in the USA because the company took that raw ingredient from China and chunked it into their capsule. That's a low quality product, I can guarantee you from the outset. But I was looking for something that was real high quality, and I stumbled across a company by the name of USANA, and their claim was that they had a process that was pharmaceutical grade, which means that it's the same quality control process that a drug company has to legally do. But nutritional supplement companies legally only have to have a clean floor. They don't have to have quality, and they don't have to have an accurate label. That's not the law in the United States. They just have to have a clean place where they put the thing together. So when I discovered that this company potentially existed, I flew out to their company headquarters, and I spent a day with their chief scientist. His name is Dr. John McDonald. He's retired now, but he was a big part of the brains behind that company. And we walked through the whole process that they did there. I walked through the plant. He proudly showed me the extra steps they took to make sure that the raw ingredients were accurate, that there weren't any toxins. And so I came away convinced that that was probably the best company. I spent a couple more years comparing companies. I actually called probably 100 different companies over a year and talked to their quality control people just to see what their process was. And I was astounded at how poor the quality control was. In many cases, they didn't have anybody that was responsible for that. So I have recommended this particular product because of the high quality that's important to me, because if the raw ingredients aren't accurate to start with, if you don't test the raw ingredients for accuracy, then you don't know what you're starting with. And they test everything very carefully, and they also make sure there's no ingredients that aren't supposed to be there, and that's equally important to me. The second thing that struck me about this company was that Dr. Wentz created the product with no intention to market it. He was sick from chronic disease because he was a workaholic. And he went to his doctor, and Dr. Wentz's job was he was creating human cell culture technology and marketing that technology for different applications. So he was growing human cells in the lab. Went to his doctor gave him some vitamins to take. He went home and looked at the label and said, if we gave this to our cells in the lab, we'd kill them. And so he set out to make a supplement for himself. And then after he made it for himself, he shared it with some of his friends. And over a period of years, people talked him into making this into a real nutritional supplement for other people to consume. He never had the intention to make a product for consumption. And that's the legacy of this particular company. They're very heavily invested in ongoing deep research. And I appreciate that, because they're always improving the product, but not along fad lines, along science-based lines. So when I see a patient, I already know that they need this supplement. I've seen enough patients over the years that I know that everybody who's an adult benefits from this supplement, but I also know that most people will choose not to use it if given the option. So I'm looking for signals that they're interested in an approach that's really going to fix their problem, first of all, or they want to kind of address some of the issues, but not invest a lot of money. So if money is an issue, I never even bring up this product, because I will focus on the things that were within what they're already doing, what they're already spending. They're just going to redistribute how they're spending. But I will focus on a couple of critical vitamins, vitamin D and K2, I'll focus on those for people that don't want to invest a lot. But for people that want to be well, and they don't have a sense that I don't want to spend that money on this better product, then I'll ask them if they're interested in something that will do a better job for them. And if they are, then I'll just explain to you. So I get a sense pretty quickly where somebody's at on this spectrum. And some people clearly want to go the nutritional supplement approach, and others clearly don't want to. You can tell that from just some early discussions. And whichever way I can walk through the door and help them move down the path, I'm going to do that. And ultimately, in my mind, I'm hoping that they're going to embrace all four of these legs. And for most of my patients, they do to some extent. Now, the majority of my patients don't choose to use the USANA product, but that's okay. I mean, that's not what they're focused on. They're focused on these other things, and these are all things that work for wellness. So that's good. But if they want to go the extra mile, it's definitely something that works to do that. And I have more than 25 years of watching patients who have made those choices. So that's kind of how I approach it.
Cool. Any questions?
Do you guys have medical research studies on it?
She's asking, are there medical research studies on USANA or on?
Not specifically, yeah.
Yeah, they've got actually. I don't think it still can, but you used to be able to go to the website. You can see the research papers. They're public information. So you go to boom, 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 boom.
Jim, speak into the mic.
I'm sorry. They used to on the website publish all of the internally done the papers. The internal papers were published. Now, a lot of the research that's done by the scientists themselves is published research. So if you know who they are, which at one time we had 90 research scientists located around the world. Had them in Sydney, at the University of Sydney, Boston College, Colorado, Linus Pauling Institute. And one of the huge differences between USANA and any other company out there is the amount of our overhead that goes towards further research.
One of the things I understand is that nutritional supplement companies are not interested in getting any kind of a designation as a medical treatment. They don't want to go there because that puts them under FDA scrutiny. You know, the FDA is going to look at any claims to make. So they're never doing research that proves that they can make your diabetes be better, or that proves that you will have worse or better outcomes with heart disease or cancer. They don't do that kind of research on purpose because they don't want to be seen as a medicine. So the research that they focus on is more basic science research that looks at what I was talking about, the antioxidant damage, that kind of stuff. And they look at performance issues. Like there's a bunch of Olympic athletes that use the product because they have $1 million guarantee that they won't test positive for a banned substance. And so they have a lot of stuff that focuses on performance, but they don't really focus on disease prevention as a research topic because they don't want to make a medical claim. They're not going to ever do that because that just gets them in competition with drugs, and that's not what they want to do.
I wasn't at a convention this year, but Deborah and Barbara were. And Deborah, you were telling me they have 5 scientists they assigned to 5 new topics. 4 topics? Do you remember the topics?
One is the microbiome.
So the microbiome, they have one lead scientist now assigned just to that alone.
Well, the microbiome project, they have the
Ancient Chinese remedies.
ancient Chinese remedies. They have the was it the brain or the mind? It was brain one. Brain project. So they're talking about
Cognitive function, the brain.
cognitive function,
Okay.
and emotional health.
Cognitive function, emotional health. That's one scientist been assigned to that.
One was, can't remember the fourth. It's in my notes. Yep.
Anyway, they've split them into 4 projects now, four teams of scientists, and they picked 4 different paths that are going to be complementary. So it's really kind of cool. And then along the lines of not being able to make medical claims and stuff, there's only certain things we can say in the United States. There's actually certain vitamins that aren't allowed in the United States to be used, strains of variants. But what Dr. Wentz did, the guy that started this the guy became a billionaire, okay? His first company was wildly successful doing disease diagnoses using cell cultures. He took his own money, literally his own money out of his pocket, nobody else's, and he built Sanaviv in Mexico. And that is a facility where they can say and do and use things that we can't say and do and use in the United States. It serves dual purpose. One is it's kind of a, we're related, but we're not related research facility. And so they're testing and using concepts that we're promoting with these here, but it's real world stuff. And people come from all over the world to go to this facility.
Yeah. One of the other things that you can claim also, and we can, like you can, like there's a lot of research out there that looks at, well, what makes mitochondria healthy? What helps them to regenerate? So mitochondria are these little structures in your cells. There's between 200 and 4,000, depending on the cell, that make the energy molecules. And what happens as we get older is they become less functional and they drop off in numbers. That's not the way it's supposed to happen, but because of the pollution that we're dealing with, that's what's happening. But there are signals that you can send to the mitochondria to make them healthier, to make them regenerate, to make them replicate. And there's research that shows what are the key nutrients that makes that happen. And then you can point to, well, oh, that happens to be present in the, the USANA product. Now, it's present in other products too, but those products are just niche products. They're just designed just for mitochondrial health, and they cost just as much as USANA's product, which is designed for mitochondrial health and all the other stuff. So it's actually a way better buy for most people, although they don't know that up front because they don't know all that's in it and all that it's designed to do. But so you can say things like the research is out there that shows these kind of nutrients help your mitochondria be healthy. And that's really critical for long-term health.
Want to increase antioxidants, that's all. Everyone can give you newspapers that this increases antioxidants. But,
Oh, we got that.
you know what I'm saying?
Yeah, but we got that. We have.
Okay.
That-
Specifically the product, not just what's in the product.
No, they do blood serum testing with these products after they're used.
That's it. That's what
Okay,
I want.
okay. So all of that is done. These guys, the research and then the testing that's done is insane, and we can talk about that in a bit. I don't want to keep Doc too late because he's an hour different than us. But the other topic, the fourth topic, had to do with genetics, didn't it? There was a genome project, or so they have a whole team assigned to that now. So it's going to be kind of interesting to see what comes together over the next year or so with that.
Yeah.
So,
well, my enthusiasm for all of this is, I mean, the picture that I painted in terms of gut health, that applies to everything that I see in medicine. So all these different parts are critical parts for women who want to get pregnant and they have infertility, women who want to try to decrease autism risk. Lots of other things that we haven't even talked about tonight are connected to what we've been talking about tonight. The major diseases, the major conditions that are plaguing our society right now, they're connected to gut health. And so this is a part of the solution to helping people negotiate or navigate and avoid these conditions or decrease the risk of them, at least as time goes by. So I'm not going to say that if you follow this program, you're going to have a proven lower risk of autism, but the things that we know that contribute to autism are part of the things that I talked about here tonight. And we know that these are risk factors for autism. So by making these kind of changes, you're making a big, I think that you're going to be making a big change in risk for all kinds of neurological conditions.
Actively fighting becoming crippled and obese. Because if we don't actively do it, we will passively become obese and crippled here in America.
Can just because he said autism, can you? Did I get it? Okay. Do you believe that this protocol and all will also help to reduce the symptoms of autism if you already have it?
Yes, it definitely does. Gut health is critically important for an autistic child or autistic adults, because if you don't deal with this, you continue to have this leaky gut, and their brains are exquisitely sensitive to the garbage that's leaking through and going up to the brain. And the glyphosate actually is a chelator, so it escorts this stuff to the brain. I didn't have talked about all that stuff, but it's really important for anybody that has any kind of a neurological issue to have as healthy a gut as possible, because if it's not healthy, it's leaking stuff that is, some of it's going to the brain, whether it's heavy metals, whether it's pesticides, glyphosate itself, parts of food that shouldn't have gotten through because the digestion process wasn't ready or wasn't complete yet. All of that's part of this so-called leaky gut stuff, and it's being triggered as why what we talked about before. And all of the things I talked about, I believe, are part of the solution for having a healthy gut. There are other things I'm not trying to say this is it. I'm not trying to overload you. There are other things that you can do, but these are sort of foundational. If you don't do this, you're kind of leaving most of the money on the table, and messing around with stuff that is less helpful until you do these things. Then these other things that you can also do are more helpful.
All right, Dr. Lang, have you in your practice dealt with any patients with total colectomies patients?
Yes.
Any additional information that you would pass on to that type of a patient?
No, it's the same story. I mean, their biome's going to be different because they don't have a colon anymore, but they still have a biome, and they can still affect it by these mechanisms. And the nutritional supplement in question is digested and absorbed even in people with short bowel syndrome. So it's a highly absorbed nutritional supplement. So I would recommend, particularly somebody that has part of their bowel missing, to use this, because it's completely dissolved in the gut, in the stomach before it empties, and relatively well absorbed. You won't find pills showing up in colectomy bag.
Yeah, we've seen that already.
Well, it seems like on the diets,
seems like you're talking about the Atkins and the keto diet, keeping the blood sugar down, the protein up.
Is that a question?
Yeah, I guess.
Okay, yeah. So the ketogenic diet, the Atkins diet, and what I've described to you, which I call the modified plate, all share in common trying to keep the blood sugar from rising. So the diet that I described, I didn't go into much detail. It's still mainly carbs. Vegetables and fruit make up 2/3 of the meal plan. Protein and fat make up about 1/3 of the meal on the average meal that a person consumes with the strategy that I usually outline for people. Now, so the body's going to still rely on sugar for fuel using that strategy. It's a low glycemic approach. The blood sugar is not going to rise quickly, but the body's still going to be dependent on sugar for fuel. The original Atkins diet is actually a modified ketogenic diet. So the first phase of the Atkins diet is what we are now calling the modified ketogenic diet, which is about 70% fat. Now, once you get into ketogenic, you're switching all the way over to primarily relying on fat for fuel and secondarily on carbs, because even when you're relying on fat for fuel, the body still makes some carbs. About 20% of the fuel is coming from sugar from glucose at that point, but about 80% is coming from ketones once you're into the first stage of the Atkins or the typical modified ketogenic diet now. The second stages of the Atkins diet were closer to my modified plate strategy. They introduced more carbs, but all of them emphasize lowering the blood sugar response to the meal. But the ketogenic diet is depending on fat for fuel. It has a lot of other features and benefits. I'm a very strong proponent of it. I can teach it, but I don't typically start with it for most patients.
and you've shared with me in the past, the reason you don't start with it, that's too big of a jump for most patients to make in one leap.
It's a big jump, and it's easy for them to jump from the modified plate to the ketogenic diet if they want to. If they have medical reasons, of which there are many, it's easy to make that jump. It's not hard for them to do it. The first step is going low glycemic. That's hard for a lot of people. They go through about 2 weeks of withdrawal from the high glycemic carbs. But once they're through that, they feel great usually.
Okay. I think we better let him roll. We got a couple things to do here yet. Doc, anything else you want to say or wrap up before we make some kefir?
No, I'm exhausted. I'm just kidding.
All is well then. Thanks. That was awesome. That was awesome. Excellent. All right.
I wish you well. God bless.
Thank you. Thank you.
I'll
Bye-bye.
stop the broadcast.